Well, good afternoon, everybody. I think we're ready to start. I think we're probably one of the last ones right before happy hour, so hopefully keep you guys' attention for the next 18, 20 minutes. We've been hearing a lot, right, about responsible AI and AI frameworks, and you've heard a lot about privacy and security and getting it right. Today, I want to just kind of take you through a little bit of a journey about what regulators are saying, what are things to be focused on, and specifically, you hear a lot about what responsible AI framework looks like. You hear a lot of the bigger companies talk about what their commitments are, what their principles are, right? But how do you really operationalize something when regulations are still forming around it, right? So I'm Sachin Kothari. I'm the Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer for Johnson Controls. And just a little bit about Johnson Controls. So, we've been in the space for over 140 years, right? We bring 140 years of legacy experience in buildings. When it comes to buildings, we're 90% of the buildings around the world. We're in over 150 countries with over 2,000 work locations. So, this is a pretty large domain of our offering, right? So as you can see here, what I'm trying to show here is when it comes to data, we understand how complex data really can get, right? So looking at our integrated solutions, we're in smart buildings across our ecosystems, and our primary goal is really to achieve our customers, helping them understand their data, whether it's building data, whether it's security data, biometrics, down to solutions and making their buildings and areas more healthier and sustainable. Now, across the board, we're in also different verticals, all the way from healthcare campuses to life sciences to Heathrow Airport to FIFA, across the board. So we work with a lot of pharmaceutical companies, banking companies across the board. So we're looking at a lot of things we do is unifying data to really provide a seamless flow, whether it's unifying 30, 40 different systems, but really optimizing that data across to be able to weave that together, right? Now, what I wanted to show you guys is specifically around what the current regulatory landscape looks like, right? And I'm going to summarize this briefly, and I want to kind of, for the last 10, 12 minutes of it, really want to jump into practical takeaways and really kind of help you start thinking about what your institution, what your organization, what your models should be really focusing on, right? Now, you look at the regulatory landscape right now. Regulators are right now asking a lot of questions around the world. By the time laws are enacted, organizations right now will have poured over billions of dollars into AI systems and developing and integrating. So, in my opinion, it's not a time right now you can afford to get it wrong, particularly when the spend is already started, well before regulations has even come into forefront, right? So as you develop your own personal, your own commercial capabilities or developing with a framework, you want to be cognizant of what these regulators are saying. What are they doing? What are they enacting, right? So when you look at this landscape, China is very aggressive, right? They already have their prelim regulations in launching on August 15th. In Europe, you've heard a lot about the AI Act, right? Very risk-based approach. Expected, it's going through the final approval processes, and expected to launch in Q1 of 24. And that will have a 2-year implementation. And the other regions, US particularly, you're seeing a lot of state-level regulations starting to surface and talk about it, what AI should look like for their particular territories. And FTC is starting to point to regulating generative AI, right? You hear them talking a lot about this space. Canada, same thing. You're here, details are still pending, but they're already pointing to a regulation coming up in the next 2 years. Now, when you look at this, one of the things I wanted to kind of highlight before we jump into some of the recommendations is you look at Europe, and particularly AI Act, it's very much of a risk frame-based approach, right? And this is a model that other regulators are also following, right? And this entails a lot of transparency, lots of explainability, and in order to be able to show what is. So think of this as a nutritional label for your data. And this is what, particularly when you're applying AI, you're going to have to put some type of nutritional label on your website or on the product to show exactly what type of data it's processing. That's the kind of the easiest explanation I could provide. And when you look at AI Act, well, a lot of its principles can be easily mapped back to existing regulations within GDPR, right? And in terms of whether it's about security, about privacy, about accountability, a lot of these things are already mapped out into articles, specifically in GDPR. It relates to FIPS, right? But FIPS never was institutionalized into a formal regulation in the US where GDPR is, right? Now, so what does this look like, right? What is the core elements? What should you get right? And I think this is something that if you really kind of take this back and take this, understand this, and able to bring this back to your base, to your organization, and start applying frameworks, this is where you're going to drive practicality, where you're going to drive value and impact. So let me kind of take you guys through some of this. So when we talked about transparency, explainability for a second. So whether it's an EU, UK, US regulator, I heard, I mentioned they're already demanding transparency around the data processing around AI systems, right? They're asking for accessible explanations regarding how the system works. Perfect example, we talked about AI Act, right? And specifically earlier. So this component is going to be essential in how you create a framework within your organizations. Now, when it comes to other regulators, right? Other regulators around the world are double-clicking into some of these questions. Particularly, I've seen Singapore, UK's ICO, multiple EU countries, data protection authorities, FTC, and the list goes on and on, about how the information on this data processing is being communicated, whether it's individual or to businesses. Next is sourcing data, right? This is also another thorny one. How is this data being sourced? Does it have personal information intertwined with it? How and what was the data source to train the AI model, right? This simple question sometimes becomes really hard to answer, and even becomes harder to answer when you don't have an integrated privacy by design, security by design approach. What's the legal basis for collecting and storing and using this data, right? Was the source data represents any unbiased data, right? So you may think, well, we're not really dealing with unbiased data, we're dealing with business data, or we're dealing with this, but you will still need to be able to show whether it's the business you're selling to, because they'll need to show a regulator in terms of where this data came from. So if you're a fulfilling agent that's utilizing some of this, or you're an actual aggregator, or you're a controller, or you're a processor, there will be an obligation for this component of being able to show transparency in how this data was sourced, right? The next important category is around data protection. This is something that overlaps with explainability and transparency. So here, when you think about this pillar, think about having, and we're going to have a session tomorrow about data governance, and we'll kind of dive a little bit deeper into that session, but this is where you need a really strong data governance model and a sanitization capability, data classification, with access management policies that has to be operationalized, along with being able to administer a holistic records and information management policy. So for me, for my organization, I also own records information management schedules. That includes deletion and retention schedules that are baked in. So from a data minimization standpoint, what we design, privacy by design, it's integrated throughout our framework. But back to the AI model and core elements, this is something that's going to be extremely important to drive in. And then specifically, you hear privacy impact assessment, right? One of the other things that you're going to continue to need to do is, and if you're not already, is to be able to conduct a data protection incident. Impact assessment, whether this is done through your privacy office or it's done through a security office, but that's going to be needed to structure to really govern that data in order to classify it, who is it shareable with, where is it being combined with. If you don't have those basic essential policies, the intertwining things such as Microsoft's Copilot or other generative AI solutions, it's going to be extremely taxing and costly for your organization, right? And be able to, when you look at data protection, another question you need to be able to answer, identify any high-risk areas for data processing. Is there biometrics involved? Is there minors data being captured or screened for or not, right? So the list kind of goes on and on. I mentioned privacy by design, right, and security by design. You've heard this moniker over and over, but this is essentially, regardless, we heard through some of the other sessions, we hear this parallel tracks of different AI instances being looked at for use cases, whether it's the commercial apparatus or if something for employees, looking at creating better productivity, or even Microsoft tools that has AI built in that's monitoring employees, right? All of those have severe repercussions, particularly in highly regulated jurisdictions such as Europe. So, intertwining some of those solutions may practically to leadership may seem, oh, this is great productivity value, but going back to it, having that individual base and not having consent from them, and not having a programmatic build out on how this was integrated. If you have works council you're dealing with in certain jurisdictions, you don't have consent from them, this will become an illegal basis, right? So you have to really be careful in how the AI is being operationalized internally or your commercial solutions, both. And you can really offset that by having a proper privacy by design or security by design capability. The next one about data subject requests, right? You've heard this a lot. You've heard policies. Do you have policies and procedures in place? FTC has been really heavily talking about this a lot, particularly around regenerative AI, and they're seeing some of the harm-based, you see some of these off-use cases that surface, they're starting to investigate some of these things. They're asking, do you have policies and procedures that are in place when it comes to responding to individual concerns, particularly when there's AI being applied to the accuracy of their information? And are you keeping track of these complaints on, particularly if there's false results being implicated, right? And you have coordinated responsibility. So it's not just the privacy office or the security office that is expected to protect the data. It also is an HR initiative. It's also a finance initiative in how this particularly data subject access request and how information is being utilized of these individuals. The next one, automated decision making. You've heard a lot about this, right? This one's pretty clear. And regulations around this are very well defined. I think this is probably one of the first ones that we've seen, particularly because the concerns around harm-based approach to be really top of mind of regulators. EU, UK has already come out with specific guidance and expectations that data subjects have specific rights, particularly if there's AI being applied to their information, including whether it's profiling or if there's any legal effects concerning those users. US regulators on this hand are actually focusing on the algorithmic decision-making in context to civil law, right? Demanding explanations and preventing discrimination, right? So, but like I said, regulators, you have to start listening to what are the basis of their investigations, regardless if they have a law or not, because this will be the basis on how the regulation is going to form, and will have a tremendous impact if you don't have these frameworks that are addressing these questions and these particular core elements built into your operations. And specifically, the other part is liability, right? We've seen a lot of things, I don't know if you've been reading the press lately, but particularly whether it's Google or whether what Zoom's doing, whether Microsoft, the EULAs are being intertwined and putting the expectations back on the buyer or back on the controller, and them being the processor selling it, and expecting you to take on the ownership and saying, whatever your policies are, this AI model will intertwine those policies. So back to the liability. If you don't have that strong data structure, data classification, that data governance model, then anything you put on top of it, it's going to be even more difficult. And the best way I could explain this is, as AI is incredibly, has amazing capabilities, but if you go straight towards building the roof before you build the walls, then the whole thing's going to collapse, right? So same thing with AI. If you don't have good, strong data governance in your company, then you should be careful before bringing on some of these newer advanced capabilities into the organization. And then finally, a comprehensive ongoing data mapping. This is, I would say, one of the holy grails. Right now you see, particularly from the legal side, you see a lot of companies conducting what's called record of processing activities, but really of a snapshot that kind of shows you, where your assets reside and, what type of elements reside, but it's just a snapshot, right? Particularly if you're advancing your AI capabilities, one of the things you have to be able to do is have a comprehensive, what I call a living and breathing data map, right? A lot of these companies that are out there are starting to enable AI where not only before you had these glorified spreadsheets of you're capturing these capabilities and understanding what systems are, what assets are out there, classifying this, and then you forget about it for 6 months and you go back and, oh yeah, we change this to do this. But really, data mapping should be integrated into your framework and how you're creating your privacy impact assessment by the privacy office or the security impact assessment, that anytime a asset is touched and information is pulled to conduct certain activities, that ROPA activity gets updated and that map of that particular asset gets classified to say whether it's redundant or whether it's modified to be updated, but it stays consistent. And this is going to help you not just understanding where your data is, but specifically also around when you happen to have an incident, right? Instead of waiting for forensics to figure out what was compromised, what happened, if you have a strong data map, you can pretty much figure it out, because those schedules around turnaround times and notification, incident management are becoming tighter and tighter and expectations growing quicker. So having that last component is going to be vital and key. And then finally, I think I got a minute left. I just wanted to show you, so once you kind of think about these, what does this practical experience look like? So I'll give you a simple example. So one of the things I would recommend is going to our website. For johnsoncontrols.com, we have our privacy center. johnsoncontrols.com/privacy. There you'll see a couple of things. A lot of these expectations, a lot of these principles that you see are mapped out, are one click away for our end users. And then specifically, one of the things that we're doing, we have, is what we call data privacy sheets. What this does is really kind of shows how privacy by design works. So you heard about transparency, you heard about flexibility, you heard about showing exactly what you're doing. So for majority of our products, what we're able to show, we take the users, take the public through a journey to show them exactly what we're collecting, what kind of personal information is collected, for what reasons, what the retention deletion schedules are, who the sub-processors are, where do those sub-processors reside, what are the legal frameworks for allowing cross-border transfer mechanisms. And for this next journey, what we're going to do is go look at every area that we have AI being applied to show explainability, exactly what part of this data is AI being applied to, leveraged on, and why is it being done? What are the capabilities the user has towards opting out towards it, right? And this is what compliance starts to look like with AI Act. This is what compliance starts to look like with other regulators as they stand this up. So that, I mean, I think I'm out of time, but that'll give you a little bit of a good practical takeaway to kind of take those principles and seeing how to apply this into your own company's AI journey. So anyways, I hope this has been educational. I threw a lot of information at you, but I'm happy to talk to you guys about any of this offline as well. But thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate it.